Well, hey there, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to my, I don't know, guest room. Again, hope things are going okay for you. Hope you had a good break. Again, I kind of miss seeing all you guys, and laughing with you and working out some things. So, again, it's kind of lonely here. So what I gave you on Monday was a project in which you can create your own hack, as it were, and a new project for a hackathon. There's links to it on the weekly schedule. And one of the things that they did was they do allow for, hey, if you want to do something in Scratch, we'll let you do it in Scratch. So I'm just going to run through Scratch really quickly. We did this at the very beginning of the year. Some of you know it really well. You don't need to watch it. There's no secret formulas here. It's just if you kind of get lost or I don't really understand some things, this might be a way of helping. I'm going to put up a second video that is how to share. Some people wanted to collaborate with one another, and I'll show you how to do that as well. I'll put a second video up that will talk about that. So I think what I'm going to do is get rid of me. And because you're going to need to see all of these different components here. So this is the Scratch world, and you go to scratch.mit.edu, sign in. You should have a login, use your CUSD.me account, and you're off to the races. This little kitty cat here, this is the Scratch logo, and it's a thing that will, it's the kind of the starter sprite. You can add other sprites. You can search for some. Here's all of the different different sprites that can exist. So I want to see some animals. Here are all the animals. I want to see, I don't know, food for some reason. And a bunch of those. Yes, I like a bunch of fortune cookies. Whatever you want to have. So these are just part of the Scratch world. You certainly don't have to do that, though. You can go out and get your own image if you like, and upload that image. So it could be you, it could be a picture that you've taken, whether that's for a background or what have you. So you can do that. You can also paint your own if you wanted. Um, that's just basically using the tools that come with Scratch, and it's just basically paint, and off you go. So I'm just going to create a real simple thing to kind of just show you a little bit about what happens here. It's very similar um, to App Inventor. It's block based, same kind of thing. It's also event driven. So just as in App Inventor, we needed an event to kick things off, a click, some sort of event that would take place, a screen tap, when some sort of event would happen that would trigger other things to occur. And so the same thing is true here, that we need something to get things going. Typically, it's when the green flag is clicked, but then there are other types of things that might be a trigger as well. When something is clicked, when a key is pressed, and whatnot. So I could have this cat here move back and forth, and here's my cat. If I go to before I start coding, if I go to costumes, these are the different costumes that they have. So I'm not exactly sure what he's kind of running-ish, kind of, if you toggle back and forth, I guess it would look like he's running. So I'm going to delete him, and I'm going to right click here and maybe duplicate it. Now I've got two of the exact same sprite, which would be kind of a weird thing to do. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have him facing the other way. So I'm going to flip him in the other direction, and so that way I can move him left or right, and he's not going to back up, as it were. So now I could do something just just a standard, hello world type of thing. I go to events when the green flag is clicked. I want to control, and maybe I want to loop forever, right? So this is it's just never going to stop. It's always going to continue on, and that program will always run. Okay, so in this case, so when the green flag is clicked, nothing is going to happen, and he just sits there. I could go up to the motion and grab a move 10, and so now he's going to forever move 10 steps, and eventually gets to the end. And he'll never go off the screen, but he'll get pretty far. You can see which block is running. This one is highlighted. If I click the stop, then that little guy goes away, and he's going to disappear. Um, I could do a little test and say, well, if he touches one of the edges, I want him to turn around. So just again, a real basic thing. That's go to an if statement that's under control. If something is happening, I want him to turn 180 degrees. All right, so go in there, change that to 180. So what's the condition that I'm looking for? So these hexagon blocks here, that's the condition. So I can sense various things. I can sense, well, if he's touching the mouse pointer, put the mouse over here and that might happen, but I can also sense, if I get the guy, there we go, that he's touching the edge. Now if he's touching the edge, if I run it, he's moving, and he's rotating 180 degrees. That's the reason why he's going upside down. I'm not changing the image. I'm just having him rotate back and forth, right? So that's not terribly exciting, but it's one way. That's just a kind of a starter bit. So here's another thing that we can do. Maybe I don't necessarily want that to happen. I'll leave that up. But maybe I do want some control, such as when a certain key is pressed. And this gets to be a little bit of an issue. So I can do, if the right arrow is pressed, I'm going to have him move 10 steps in a positive direction. Let me get him to flip. There we go. There we go. So now if the right arrow key is pressed, he's going to move 10. Now you'll notice that there's a little bit of a lag, and I can duplicate this and change that to a negative 10. And now he's going to move backwards, but he's going to back up. So I'm going to change that to the left. Now I've got code here where he is, if the right arrow is pressed, he's going to go in one direction. If the left arrow is pressed, he's going to go in the other. And so there he goes backwards. Here he goes forwards. And you'll notice that there's a little bit of a lag. If you're doing a game where I need him to move quickly, it has to kind of think about whether or not that has happened. So, and the other thing that I'll show you too is that because I have these two different costumes going, maybe I want him to switch between the two depending on which key is pressed. So that's under looks. I can switch to a given costume. So costume 2 is the one that is going the other way. So when the left arrow is pressed, now he's pointing to the left. He's backing up here because I haven't done the same thing on the other side. I would grab that block, click on switch to costume 1, and now here he goes. He's going to move one way, he's going to move the other, and he changes. Again, there's a lag there that is just a little too long for most people's pleasure. So another thing that I can do is I can say, well, I always want that to happen. So I might grab that forever block again, and a different way, instead of doing it as an event, I can do a couple of if statements in here. So I always want him to be moving around and sensing whether or not that those left arrow keys are pressed. And here's that block here. So it's under sensing. It's sensing various things. So I could have, if he's touching a particular color, if you are doing a game or doing something where if he touches a color, that's going to mean something. If the mouse is clicked, I'm going to put in these different keys here. So here's going to be the right arrow, and these two guys are going to go inside that. And these two guys are going to go inside of the second if. Notice that I don't have a condition yet, so that's problematic. So right click on this and duplicate it, stick that in there, change that to the left arrow. And now when I run, he moves a lot quicker. All right, so it's always sensing, and there's not that delay. A little bit, but certainly is a lot better than what it was. All right, and right now he's moving 10. So I could say, well, I want him to always move 10, but maybe I want to give him a little boost every so often. So just as in App Inventor, I can create a variable. These guys here, these are all just make a variable, give it a certain name. This is a default. So there's a, excuse me, there's a variable called my variable. You can create one that'll be speed or something like that. And if you needed to make a list of things, if you wanted to make a quiz, all right, I'm gonna have a list of answers and a list of questions and all that kind of stuff. We're off to the races there. So I might make a variable. I'm going to call it speed. And I do need to make a little bit of a decision as to whether or not, do I want that variable for all the sprites, or is it just for this sprite only? I might have multiple sprites that I want different speed variables for. So I'm going to say this is just for this one sprite. It's showing up, and that's a nice way to begin. But eventually, if I want to hide it, all I have to do is just go to my variables and deselect it, and it will not show up. So it's nice to show me what's there while I'm working on it. And I'm going to do a couple of other things. So one thing is I'm going to set that variable, not my variable, but speed, to 10. And instead of moving exactly 10 steps, I'm going to move speed steps. But this is negative 10, so I'm going to multiply the speed times negative 1, and that'll make it a negative value times negative 1. Notice that I pulled this off, and I'll show you. I'll talk about that in just a second. So I'm setting that to 10. But right now, what I want to do is maybe I want other things to happen. Just as in App Inventor, what we did is we created multiple procedures that did one very specific job. We can do the same thing. So here's, I think they call it procedures in App Inventor. They call them blocks, my blocks. We're going to make a block. I'll call this motion. And if I wanted to pass a parameter to this block, what do I want to set it to, or do add a true false, or add more text to it? I can certainly do that. So I can add these other elements to my to this particular block if that was necessary. In this case, I'm just going to have it be a block that's just going to be motion. It's going to run the same thing. So here is the defined motion, and all I'm doing here is just setting that to how this guy's going to move. So right now, if I were to run it, notice that nothing is happening. He's not moving at all. I'm hitting the keys and nothing is going on. That's because there's no call between when the green flag is clicked and this guy. So I'm going to drag that motion over. Now when the green flag is clicked, all of a sudden this is operating and he's now listening for what's happening. Another feature that exists as well is this thing called a timer. And so the timer, it just keeps counting up even if you stop it. So the app is stopped, nothing is running on my screen, but the counter continues to go up. And that is going to be the case until the green flag is clicked again. in which case that's when it resets. You can reset timers, but this is universal, so all sprites are listening to this. So if you have multiple sprites that are using the timer and you reset it, you can have some weird things that happen on that. So you might think about not doing that, or I'll show you a different way of looking at that. So I'm just going to have the timer running, and I want something else to maybe appear on the screen every so often. And so I'm going to go to, they had a funky thing, a little crystal. All right, so this crystal is going to fall from the sky. One thing I need to explain too, App Inventor starts at this point at 0, 0 and increases columns and rows. So we can move things down, and everything was moving in a positive number. Things are a little bit different in Scratch. I can see what the XY coordinates are right here. So I'm close to the center. The midpoint is similar to regular geometry in that that's going to be the actual 0, 0 is the midpoint of the stage. All right. And as I go up, just as in geometry, the Y value is going to be positive. If I move over to the right, the X value is going to be positive. If I move back to 0 and then to the left, that should be a negative value. So this area over here is a negative value. I'm above the 0, the Y-axis. So this is still, the Y is positive. If I bring it down below that 0, that X-axis, it's now negative. So it's just like regular geometry in that you now have X, Y are both positive, X is positive, Y is negative, both are negative. The X is negative and the Y is positive over here. So I might want him to fall from the sky. And if I do that, I can take a look and see, well, where is that exactly going to be? It's up to the dimensions of the stage are, what is it? It's 480 by 360. So it's 240 from 0 to positive 240, negative 240 on the other edge. Same thing on the top. So this is going to get closer and closer and closer to 360. I'm sorry, 180, and it's going to be negative 180 down towards the bottom. All right. So just so you know, just the XY coordinates might be an important thing for you to have happen. The other thing is in the direction. So direction, this is similar to how it worked in App Inventor, in that the current direction is 90. That is to the right. So 90 degrees to the right in App Inventor was 0. To the right in Scratch is 90. Straight up is 0, which is not the way most games are actually created. So maybe I want this guy to appear at a random spot. And so I can do that. I can say, that's under operators. Here's pick a random number. And I could do 1 to 10 or 1 to 100. That's very lovely. I might want him to be a random X. That would be from a negative 240 to a positive 240, but that might be 240 is all the way to the very, very edge. And so what I'm going to do is I'll say, say from negative 230 to positive 230. And that is going to be his X coordinate. So if I were to do this, I want him to go to a random X, but Y, let's start him at, say, 100. If I call this block, he's now moving to different spots. He's all on the same Y-axis, the Y coordinate, but the X-axis is changing. So I can take a look down here. Here's his Y. It's stuck at 100 because of this, but this number is changing, and it's just picking a random number between those range of things, and we're off to the races. I can hide them for a while too. So maybe I don't want them to be there at the beginning. So I can, when the green flag is clicked, for example, maybe I'm going to do that, and I also want him hidden. So I'll go to looks and down. Oops, too far. I'm going down. There we go. Show and hide. So I'm going to hide him. So now when the green flag is clicked, he's gone. All right, he's added. He is there. All right, he's in the world, but he's not visible. If you're looking for collisions, it's not gonna be able to collide with anything, even though it technically is on the stage. Something might happen that where I want one sprite to talk to another, like maybe something is going to trigger this thing to go about. So if he walks into the mouse pointer, for example, I want this crystal to show up. So I'm going to go. Oops, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I'm going to go back to this guy, and he's moving around, and I've got my motion here. That's all great. I might do another if statement. So if another event is happening, and that's that same sort of sensing thing. If he is touching the mouse pointer, I now want to signal it's time for the crystal to show up. And the way that is done is through this thing called a broadcast. And so you can either do a broadcast and just keep on going, or wait for something to happen. So that's what these two guys are looking at. So I'm going to do a new broadcast. And message 1 is pretty boring. It's not very clear. So I'm going to call this show crystal. So this guy over here, he's going to a different XY, all right? And I can see what that is. And sure enough, it's still changing down here every time I click on it, but he's not appearing. Now, when I receive that show crystal message, I'm going to have him show up. Assuming I can get there. There it is. He's going to show. So try it again. He showed up because I moved the cursor over the cat. So he's not there, and if I put the cursor over here and move him there, when he's touched, he's going to appear. Another thing that you can do is I might decide, well, you know what, I'm going to do a little quiz kind of a thing. So I'm going to go back over here, go to letters, and it's going to be a block Q. It's going to ask a question. So if I wanted to do a quiz, maybe the question is going to pop up when the user clicks on the Q. So notice that there's no code in here, even though I've got code for my cat and a little bit of code for my crystal. Here's my Q. I'm going to go up to an event when this sprite is clicked. So when the Q is clicked, he's going to ask a question, ask and wait, and it does pause everything. So instead of, well, maybe it is what's your name, but what was Lincoln's first name? So it's running along, and if I click on this, this happens. So it's just waiting for a response. That response gets stored in this this variable here called answer that is just sort of dangling out there and not really knowing what to do. I'm going to hide the timer there. So I'm going to type something in here. We'll call it, his name was really George. Most people don't know that. And it's now stored in that variable, and it's not going to change until you ask another question. So if I did another thing, if I go back to sprite 1 and said when that sprite is clicked, he's going to say, he's going to say what that answer was. That's under sensing. Here's the answer. I'll just stick that in there. So I answered George a while ago, but George is still being held in that answer variable. So if I click on it, it just says George. That's kind of blunt. So I can, I think it's under operators. I can join some things together. So the way this works, it's a little clunky. There's a join in App Inventor where we could plug in a whole bunch of different things. So I might do something like this, where instead of saying apple and banana, I want to join hi, my name is, in a space. Now it's going to say, hi, my name is George. And if I wanted more things besides just those two, I would put in, I can keep putting all these guys together. Here's my name is George. And instead of banana, I'm going to put an exclamation mark. Now when I click on him, oh, there it is. Hi, my name is George. And again, so that answer variable is going to be stored until you ask another question. Lincoln's first name was actually John. And if I click on him, now he says his name is John, or what have you. So broadcasts are kind of a cool way for multiples, for sprites to communicate with one another. I could have multiple, the queue, maybe that queue is going to show up at the same time and other things are going to happen. Maybe this is going to be a little bit of a timer. It's going to fall down when it gets to the bottom. Person needs to have answered by that particular point. And I can create my own blocks, just as we did in App Inventor. You can create your own sprites. Right now I've got just a kind of a boring background. It's just white, but I can change that. So just as you can get all sorts of different images from that they have. So these are all of the images on there. That would be annoying. Oof, that's awful. Can I Control Z that? No. Or I could draw it, or I could go out to the web and create my own. And blue sky, so much nicer. And notice right here, notice that there's no code here. That's because I'm on the stage, and that allows me to create the code that is specific for the stage. So that some things aren't going to happen. So there are no motion blocks because the stage is permanent, right? So it does not move. I can have characters on the stage move, but the stage itself can't, won't be able to change. I could change to a next backdrop or a different image if I wanted. Play some sounds and have different events. And so there are all sorts of different things that in terms of code that it can do as well. So that's a little different from App Inventor. So that's some cool stuff. My hope is that you'll be able to create something and really hope that you're able to submit that to the hackathon. If not, that's okay. It's not a requirement that you do that. I just thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do. But I would like you to make that, make a project here, and I'll have everybody turn in a link that will go to your project at the end. So if you could do that, if you're submitting for the hackathon, that is due on Friday. If you aren't interested in doing that, I'm going to be asking for the link on Tuesday. So yeah, there you go. hope you're good. I'll do a link on how to share with other folks if you want to collaborate with some people. And again, I hope you're doing well. Hope you're not going too crazy. It's tougher and tougher as the weather gets better and better. But yeah, miss you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.